How we all doing tonight? Well, good. As Randy said, you know, there's the Chinese proverb, may we live in interesting times, right? Well, we got interesting times, that's for sure. So as Randy said, I'm John Carl. I run a company called the Retirement Learning Center. We're based out of New York City and Minnesota. We've got 2 offices. We're a group of folks, and when you deal with Carver Financial, they do everything for you. They do total financial planning. I have the luxury, and my colleagues have the luxury, we just focus on one aspect of that planning process, and that's the ERISA space, the retirement space, the Employee Retirement Investment Savings Act of 1974. You know, it's funny, I was talking to my wife earlier, and I was like, you know, we're doing a big program tonight, lots of folks are coming. It's really cool to know so much about ERISA. I got the same reaction from her. There was an odd silence on the end of the phone and then some modest laughter. And I was like, well, okay. Nonetheless, I will submit to you that it is cool. Maybe it's cooler to know somebody who knows so much about ERISA because it does impact you. And that's essentially the relationship we have with Randy. Randy has one of the finest practices in the entire Raymond James system. We've been supporting him and his colleagues for years in this piece of the pie that relates to retirement. Right? And that's an awfully important aspect of it. You know, that's all we spend our time doing. So today, though, Randy asked me to talk a little bit because we do spend a fair amount of time watching what's going on in Washington, getting involved in that stuff, to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in Washington and how that might impact your retirement and just some of the general observations that we've had there. So the big question I would say for you, think about this. Let's pretend that you've just been recently elected into some congressional office, right? And you're going down to Washington and you're put on a committee and the committee says, let's deal with the issues of Americans and retirement, okay? Now think of the previous administration, right? Now think of the current administration, right? Have the issues changed for that Congress person from the previous administration to this administration? Yes or no? Nope. Issues haven't changed. What are they? We got essentially, I would sum it up, and I'm hearing all this stuff. You're absolutely right. Essentially, from a retirement perspective, are we living longer? Yep. Longevity, you know. And how is our savings rate? Maybe not for the folks in this room who are engaged in the process and are actively working and moving forward, but if you look across all of America on average, not enough savings, living longer, and some of our social programs, how are they looking? Not optimal, right? Not optimal. So that's the issues, and it's the same issues from the previous administration to this administration. The issues haven't changed, okay? Now I'll ask you the big question. Have the tactics changed on how to address those issues from the previous administration to the current administration? Oh yeah, it's about a 180-degree change that we've seen there philosophically in the way to address the issues. And by intention, there are no cocktails being served so that, you know, we can't talk that much about politics. Because it's too emotional at this juncture. But nonetheless, the tactics have changed. And if you sum up the tactics, the previous administration, what did they want to do to Social Security? Privatize it, right? It's your money, you're contributing to it, you'll have an opportunity to manage it with some proper governors put on it. This administration, what do they want to do? Yeah, they think that they should be controlling it, right? That's a total, now there's a big philosophical difference. And I'm not here to tell you which is right and which is wrong. We can have cocktails later and talk about that. You know, but you know, at the end of the day, philosophically, they're coming at it from 2 totally different places, right? And because of the midterm elections that we've had, right? Legislation is when Congress acts, the president signs things into law, right? How is our legislative process working right now with a Republican-controlled House and a Democratic Senate? How are we doing? Stalemate. Very good. It's kind of like grinding pretty slow, right? Kind of grinding pretty slow. And what do we need to be doing from a legislative perspective? We need to be chugging along, right? We need to be fixing things. We need to be moving along. We need to be doing that. Now, on the flip side of it, there's another thing you can do out of Washington that's not legislation. It's called regulation, right? And who does regulation?
The executive branch.
And people who were appointed by the executive branch, right? So under the retirement or the ERISA space, that comes out of the Department of Labor and to some extent the Treasury, right? So from a regulatory perspective, we have a philosophical change from the previous administration to the current, and we've got some very interesting proposed regulations coming out that we're going to talk about. But before we go there, I want to get to the macro point, which Randy served up perfectly, which is this, right? We're in this situation, and I get to lecture out at UCLA's Anderson School of Management. They have something called the Retirement University. How nerdy is that, that there's something called the Retirement University? It's terrific for me. You guys would be bored to tears, you know, hanging out with a bunch of ERISA people. Although we do have cocktails, so, you know, you might enjoy that session. But nonetheless, at the Retirement University, I get to lecture next to Professor Shlomo Bernartzi, who is the co-chair of the Behavioral Finance Department for UCLA's Anderson School of Management. Has anybody had the opportunity to hear or read any of Professor Shlomo Bernartzi's works? Well, perhaps if you're lucky, Randy will invite him by. Generally, when Randy invites you, you come. You come on in. And I would urge you, if you get to hear Shlomi address you, you should just come, if for nothing else, to see a man named Shlomo Bernartzi. And because he's a very brilliant man. And he's a co-chair of this behavioral finance effort at UCLA, which is one of the best in the nation. Now, I'll ask you this question. What the heck is behavioral finance? Who wants to venture a guess what behavioral finance is? Anybody? This is the interactive part of the presentation. Nobody volunteering? It's the study of the psychology of the investor. They just made a fancy term up, really. It's like, essentially, it's why do people do stuff with their money, right? And I'll tell you, I grew up in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, good old Kutztown, PA. Why do people do stuff with their money? Well, it's based a little bit on how they're thinking, but an awful lot more based on what? How you're feeling, right? And how is everybody in the room feeling right now about their investments? Not bad because you're with Randy, right? Pretty good. There's hope, springs eternal, it's good, you got guidance, right? But let me ask you this question. How did you feel last week when the market was selling off? No, I've been there, done that. That's good. That's good. That's good if that's the way you were feeling. Because what I'm going to submit to you here is right now we have a group of 12 people, right, who are in charge of fixing this deficit reduction. That's the big term coming out of Washington, deficit reduction. Why do we have to have deficit reduction? Because we spend more than we take in. We printed an extra $3 trillion along the way, so we have deficit reduction, and the world is calling on us to get more in line fiscally, right? And when you look at what the interest is that's piling up on our interest, it's big numbers, right? It's basic stuff that I learned in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. Try to keep within your means, borrow a little bit, but don't get crazy. That's just basic stuff that's going on here. So we have this group of 12. And how are they behaving from a behavioral finance perspective, the 6 versus the 6? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Because if you're going to deficit reduce, there's two sides to that, right, that can be done. If you're going to reduce a deficit, what are the two things you can do to reduce a deficit? One, as you aptly point out, is to increase, as they call it, revenues. Now, what is a revenue to our government? Your tax dollars, correct. That is absolutely right. So their revenues, your tax dollars. So you could increase those. That's one way to do it. Pay off some of the deficit. What's the other way? Reduce spending, right? Reducing spending. Okay. So what are the Republicans saying about their interest in increasing revenues? Those 6 have taken an oath towards that. Ain't gonna do it. Line in sand, not happening, don't go there. It's early in the process, you know. It's early in the process. You know, how is the other side feeling about reducing spending? Same kind of concept, right? So here we have the conundrum. But yet, we have to make progress, right? Because as Randy said, what does the market hate? What does the financial market hate? Uncertainty, not good. Let's talk about our pal Warren Buffett. How's he doing? Third wealthiest man in the world? You know, not too shabby, right? Not too shabby. Anybody read what Warren Buffett published in his op-ed in the New York Times? Read that? What did he say? He goes, you know, I'm rich, don't mind paying some more taxes, you know, don't mind doing that, and went on to opine further about that. Do you think Warren Buffett is really excited about paying more taxes? Really?
He's got so much it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, but let me get to where I think what he was saying here. What does Warren Buffett run? Anybody know? Berkshire Hathaway, right? And what is Berkshire Hathaway? It's a conglomerate holding company that owns a lot of businesses, all different kinds of businesses, right? That he thinks are good values that he wants to own for the long term. If we remove uncertainty, let's say we increase Warren Buffett's taxes 5% a year, right? And one group can claim victory. We are taxing the rich, you know? And we get all the uncertainty out of the way. We reduce spending to some extent. You know, some of it we'll like, some of it we won't like. What might happen to Berkshire Hathaway should we remove all the uncertainty in the marketplace? What do you think Warren Buffett thinks is going to happen to Berkshire Hathaway if we remove all this nonsense? Yeah, and if Berkshire Hathaway doubles, what's he going to be doing paying his extra 5% taxes for 3 years when his Berkshire Hathaway has doubled? He will now be the wealthiest man in the world, and he'll be laughing all the way to the bank.